Hey guys, it's episode 24 of Stand Up. I am your host, Pete Dominic. Today's question, how important is and how much do you think about diversity in your workplace or your industry? I mean, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, sexual orientation diversity. Are these things you think about? Are they important? Does it matter? That is what we're going to answer with my guest, April Rain, today. Very good conversation that I had with her. Hello, friends, and welcome to the classroom of life. That is Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where every show I'm doing my best to fight apathy and ignorance and learn together with you, our expert guests, and interesting people about the issues and ideas that matter to you, your family, your community, the country, the planet, the world that we live in. And I haven't had one woman of color on the program yet. We've had a pretty good mix gender-wise. We've had a lot of women on the show, probably more men, mostly white men, I guess. But I really want to change that. I really want to have all different kinds of people on the program. Sexual orientation, religion, ideology, you name it. And obviously ethnicity. And I'm on Twitter the other day and I see this tweet from April Rain, who I've been following for a long time. And I thought, I wonder if she'd join me in a conversation. And guess what? She said, yes, we had a really enlightening conversation. This is a special one for sure. How do we create opportunities for traditionally underrepresented communities? Should we be creating those opportunities? I say, of course we should. And April Rain holds my hand all the way through it. I get very honest. I get very vulnerable, sharing with her my ignorance about all of these things, how I think, and she helps me think a little bit better, more open-minded. And I'm really excited to share this conversation with you right here coming up in just a second. I just want to remind you to consider a Patreon subscription. So over 220 people have done that, which is huge because that is what is supporting the podcast. I think we're about to get our first sponsor, which is really, really exciting. The numbers are growing, but I got to get out there, obviously, and promote the show, which I did a lot over the weekend. I was on CNN twice, MSNBC. I did a whole bunch of shows at Gotham Comedy Club as well, and watched Eddie Murphy on Saturday Night Live, which was awesome. I hope that you had a good weekend, and I hope that you are ramping up for Christmas. It's Hanukkah. If you're Jewish, happy Hanukkah. And what else can I tell you? I'm going to be in Charleston, South Carolina, January 18th, headlining the Charleston Comedy Festival. So if you know anybody in Charleston, South Carolina, please tell them to go. Okay, let's get right to the conversation right now with April Rain, who I want you to follow on Twitter at April Rain, REIGN. And I think you're going to really like it. I learned so much from this conversation, and I think, especially if you're a white person, you got to listen to this. Here it is. Do you think that this music is, in fact, cheesy, or does it feel good?
I think that you have better options.
Very excited to have her, my next guest, joining me. She's a writer, editor, a former lawyer, and now activist who created the Oscars So White hashtag to mock the lack of diversity at the Academy Awards all the way back in 2015. Since then, she's been traveling the world speaking and advocating for more diversity and inclusion in all industries and all walks of life. She has a really strong online presence talking about a wide range of topics, everything from entertainment to politics to racial and gender representation. I thought she'd be an awesome guest to talk about it all with me here on the new podcast. And you have to follow her on Twitter at Rain of April, REIGN of April. It's April Rain, and I am so excited to have you on the phone.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I've been following you on Twitter, and I saw some tweet the other night, and I was like, why don't I ask her to come on the show and have a conversation? And you agreed to. So thank you very much. I want to start by just getting to know you a little bit, because a lot of the guests that I've been having on the show, I know pretty well from my old Sirius XM show, but this is the first time we've talked. So where did you grow up?
Well, that's a great question. I was born in Newark, New Jersey, but my dad was in the military, so we moved around a lot. always domestically, always within the states. But for example, I went to 3 different high schools in 3 different states: Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia, in that order.
What was that like? How did you, I mean, that must have been really challenging, just jumping into new high schools.
Yeah, it was challenging. As I look back on it now, I think it actually was helpful in the sense that I'm now able to step into a room and read it almost immediately, and determine where I need to be. If you think back to high school, it was always, okay, well, which table in the cafeteria did you sit at for lunch? Which clubs made the most sense for you to belong to? And so I'm sort of using those experiences now. The downside is that I didn't have I don't have like lifelong friends from high school because we moved around a lot. There were a couple of people. So in fact, I think my closest friends now are people that I have met in real life from being Twitter friends first.
Tell me more about your family. Do you have siblings? And do you what was it like? What, your dad in the army or what?
Yes, my dad. I was in the Army, and so I am the oldest of 2. I have a brother who's 4 years younger, and he lives near my parents, who live outside of Atlanta in Georgia. So it was just the 2 of us, and now I have 2 kids of my own.
How old are they?
My son is 20 and a junior in college, and my daughter is 16 and a junior in high school.
I saw your tweet about the SATs. Can you explain that?
Yes. So what I tweeted is my daughter took the SAT as a junior a couple of weeks ago, and the results are supposed to be back tomorrow. And I think that as parents, we sort of put a lot of our own anxiety on our kids with respect to certain things. And we can have a very long and spirited discussion about whether the SAT is a good or even the best indicator with respect to collegiate success. I don't believe that it is. And I also believe that, for years, there's been some significant bias against more marginalized folks and definitely folks in lower income brackets. But she took the test. The results are supposed to come out tomorrow. And what I said on Twitter was, don't ask your kids. Like they're already anxious enough about what score they made, how well they did, so on and so forth. So give them some time to process the score, good or bad. And then, hopefully they will come and share that information with you. But, I really believe in giving kids as much agency as they can handle, recognizing, of course, that every child is different. You have daughters, right? 12 and...
My daughters are 12 and 14. And
okay.
My big struggle right now, I guess this is a sign of privilege, but is my 12-year-old's addiction to the phone. How has that been for your daughter? You said your son's 20, but I suppose you had a phone in high school too.
He did. And so we actually had, because our kids are 4 years apart, they were never in the same school at the same time. So, right. She was in middle school, he was in high school and so on. And so the bigger struggle for us was, with the second kid, you sort of get a little tired. And I don't know how people with more than 2 do it. And so my daughter has gotten away with or received privileges a lot earlier than my son did. And so we check in with him to ensure that he's okay with the fact that she's getting a phone earlier. She got her first tattoo a couple of weeks ago at 16. And so there were a lot of conversations behind that.
You meant what you said about agency. Tattoo. My wife has tattoos, both my daughters. My older one definitely talks about getting one, but I call me an old fuddy-duddy. But I am so against that because it's permanent. And I feel so weird about, I don't know, letting her get something like that permanently before she's 18. I always, I sound like an old person, but it's like, when you're out of my house, you can do whatever you want. Right. It's your body. You can do whatever you want. Of course, I believe that. But what was the negotiation?
But you don't. But you don't. Right. It can't be. You can't say your body, your choice. You can't say it's your body. You do whatever you want. If the qualifier is once you're 18 and or out of the house. Right. And so I was exactly where you are. And I have tattoos myself and still struggled over it. But what I will say is that my daughter is incredibly self-aware. So we traveled to Tokyo last year and with the kids, and it apparently made an impression on her such that she wanted something that was Japanese inspired. And she thought about this for a whole year. We talked about placement, right? Because I said, well, what about your prom dress? Are you going to want that tattoo showing, that kind of thing? In addition to job interviews further down the line and all of that. Obviously, tattoos are much more accepted in society than they were when I was a kid. And so, she had an excellent argument. She researched a tattoo artist. We talked about what she wanted, why, and where, and it all made sense. And, and true to, your body, your choice and body autonomy, I went with her and she didn't even flinch.
Oh. Can I ask where she got it? Where you agreed?
Yes, she got it on her upper arm, right at her shoulder area. And so, we talked. I said, okay, I have one up there. And if I had to do it over again, I may have moved it to someplace that wasn't visible, so it's not visible under a T-shirt, under short sleeves. But if I'm wearing a strapless something or other, it is. And so we talked about that. She said, nope, she was okay with, if she's wearing a gown or a tank top, it would be showing. And so I said, okay.
Let's go back to tests, because
yes.
I think that tests as a measure for almost anything stink. And I probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but I grew up with, I don't know, I guess a lot of privilege. I don't know what the word even means anymore, but certainly with a lot of resources. I took a course to help me with the SATs.
Yes.
But I sucked at tests. I got anxious about them, but mainly I don't have that kind of memory. I'm the kind of person who could study really hard for days or weeks and not do good on a test because I don't remember things, and I just get really anxious, as opposed to somebody else who hears something once, doesn't study, and does great. Yet it's supposed to determine the college I get into or any part of my future. And that I'm giving you an example from a guy, a white kid who grew up in the suburbs and was able to take an SAT course. And I did terrible. I don't know anybody that got worse scores on my SATs. And I didn't do well in school either, but I've done very well in life because life is I've succeeded because more the hustle, the grit, the networking, the personality, the work ethic, and obviously, a certain sense of privilege and doors opening for me. But what are your thoughts on tests in general? I mean, you went to law school, you went to a good college, so you were probably a good student.
I was a good student, and in high school, I remember, I didn't need to study. I could just go in and coast. For most of college, it was basically the same way, but I did have my challenges. Law school is a completely different animal. You had to study all the time. And so that was a steep learning curve for me because I hadn't had to do it at that level previously. I absolutely agree with you that the tests are not a good indicator of collegiate success. And there are some who argue that collegiate success is not a good indicator of how you will be, or lack thereof,
Sure.
of how you will be in life. And obviously, you're a good example of that. Something that my daughter said to me that really stuck with me is, she is a smart kid. And so, as a junior, she's now in calculus. But the things that they're teaching, and they actually at her high school, she goes to a public high school, they actually have a semester long course that actually teaches tricks of the trade for the SAT. So she's been in that class all semester. But what she said is the math that is on the SAT is from stuff that she learned, 3 years ago. And so that is her struggle, that her math score was suffering just because she had learned the information so long ago, because it's not calculus on the SAT. It's, something closer to algebra or geometry. And so she was struggling with that and figuring out how to sort of recalibrate and refresh her memory on those things. But I absolutely agree with you. I remember, I don't even remember what they're called, the syllogisms or whatever, cup is to saucer is, as is whatever to whatever.
You're making me anxious.
But if you grew up in a house where, you didn't have saucers for, because you didn't drink tea, or that wasn't, your economic station in life, how would you possibly know what a saucer relates to on the other side of that equation? So I absolutely agree with you. There's an essay on the SAT now. They've been fiddling with it. When I took the SAT, there wasn't one. It was just sort of, the Scantron thing. And that may be a better indicator, I think, of just thought process. it's, how you work through an issue as opposed to, whether you can carry the one.
So when you why did you go to law school?
I went to law school for a couple of reasons. Again, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was in high school, if you wanted to be a professional, that meant lawyer, doctor, engineer, and maybe accountant. Like those are your four options, as opposed to, kids of the world today who have the entire universe at their feet and can even create their own career, which I think is fantastic. My mother went to law school, graduated, passed the bar, but never practiced because she became pregnant with me unexpectedly and decided that she didn't want to have to deal with the number of hours that she would have to put in with a young baby at home. And so she took administrative jobs way beneath her education just so she would have a regular 9 to 5. So I think part of it was fulfilling the dream that was deferred for her. I think part of it was knowing that I write very well, I speak very well, and I love to argue. So that, and I didn't like blood, so doctor was out, right? And I didn't want to.
You practiced law for 20 years too?
I wasn't really happy with math, so accounting was out. An engineer, I toyed with that for a little bit, but I couldn't see myself doing that forever. And so lawyer made sense, and that's where I went. Yeah, just about. I think just under 20 years doing. Initially, I was doing big corporate defense, and again, this was, almost 25 years ago now, in which, we were representing sort of really bad actors, cigarette companies and asbestos companies. And that wore on me. I'm trying to hold up people when we know that, people are dying from your products, right? And so I couldn't do that very long. And so I switched to campaign finance law, which was interesting for a while. And then we had the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, and we had Citizens United. And once they said that, corporations could be people,
much less people of color, were in the room,
it made it a lot harder to deal with that entire field. And coincidentally, at the same time, Oscar So White came along, and so it was actually a great time for me to leap. I could count them on one hand, men and female, people of color. I could count them on one hand. And the really interesting thing is, and this again, I'm happy to say I'm 49. I'll be 50 in May. And so I was a baby lawyer and brought in like a 5-inch black and white screen TV into the office so that we could watch the OJ verdict, if you can imagine. And so, of course, everyone had piled into, and this is, a whole bunch of white, mostly male, but also female partners and associates piled into my room. And you can imagine that my reaction,
if you don't like this question,
was a bit different.
Tell me how it can be asked differently. But I do like to ask this question, especially to Black women, in terms of how you identify in your life. Do you identify more as female, more as a Black person, a person of color? By the way, which phrase do those matter? Like, because I often, well, I won't tell you what I often hear, but I feel like that's an interesting and fair question for someone like yourself, because both of those categories are categories that are obviously marginalized and have been discriminated against. And to be a member of both categories, I wonder if you separate the two, if you identify more with one, or if you think this is a shit question.
No, I like the question. I'm Black first, all day, and then I'm a Black woman. And I, as you say, I recognize the intersectionality of the two. But in my mind, in the womb, because of who my parents are, because of what my lineage is, I was Black before, and so now as I move through the world, I recognize, there is a distinction, Mickey Kendall says, solidarity is for white women. She has this running hashtag, which is absolutely fantastic, because what we see is all too often, we can talk about the 53% of white women who voted for Trump. We can talk about the way that the Women's March was sort of co-opted by white women until things turned around. But what we see is that white women very often move in spaces in which their race comes before their gender. And I do as well. Right. And so I'm always going to be on the side of the most marginalized. So as I walk in this world, I think about how I can better the Black, trans, disabled woman. Right? If I am doing something that is going to better her life and lift her up, then, a rising tide raises all ships. If she's good, then I know that everybody else is going to be good as well.
That's a really interesting answer and fascinating way to look at it. How has in your personal journey, working in corporate law and now everything else that you're doing, give me some examples of when you realized in the moment that you were Black, or that you were a woman, or that you were a Black woman. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I feel like these kind of anecdotes are always helpful for people to understand. I've been asking this type of question a lot lately. Like, what moments do they happen all day? Were they more prominent when you're in a room of powerful white people?
Yeah, and they even start way before then. It's the first day of school, in middle school and in high school, when your best buddy comes up to you and shows you their forearm and says, "Look, I'm as Black as you are." Right? That happens when you're 10, when you're 13. And so that's when I think you get the message. We know that hate and discrimination and bigotry and racism and homophobia and all of the phobias are taught, right? They are learned behaviors. It's not an automatic thing. So, if my girlfriend comes up to me and says that she's attempting to mimic who I am, but doesn't travel in that space, she still has the privilege to go back home and do whatever she can do and with things that I cannot, then that's a startling wake up call.
I'm sorry, I'm not following you. When someone comes up and says, I'm as Black as you are, you're saying that's a white person?
Yes.
Why?
Because she has been on the beach or at the pool all summer long. And so she's nice and tan. Yep. She's nice and tan. She's nice and tan. Or in fact, when I created Oscar So White, the very first tweet on that was, "Oscar so white, they asked to touch my hair." And Black women can absolutely identify with that, because we have all, even as adults, been asked, or sometimes not even asked, just been approached and had our hair touched because it is different / exotic / whatever, not the, what people say are the beauty standards. Viola Davis had that, right? Unconventional beauty is what they said. To whom? Whose convention are we using and why for having that? So yes, as I'm dealing in, now I work as an advocate for diversity and inclusion issues, predominantly in the entertainment industry. So when I walk in the room and I am the only Black person, the only woman, the only Black woman, it is very obvious. And that's how we can move to having a conversation about allies versus advocates, right? And what do you do when you're in that room feeling alone, feeling isolated, but still need to make change? Need to question what is happening with respect to both recruitment and retention of traditionally underrepresented communities at that particular organization. What you do when you walk into a writer's room and, there are no marginalized folks there, and yet they're writing for characters of color, or they're writing for characters from the LGBT plus community. How do you make those changes? Because change is hard. And I think people resist it, even if they know that lack of change means lack of progress.
So tell me if this makes any sense, or if this is kind of ignorant in its on its face. But I think I have now personally have a kind of bias towards offering a certain amount more respect or appreciation for anybody who has overcome really any kind of adversity. If you're white and poor and you weren't born to, a really successful family, and you somehow, you did well in school, you got into a good school, and you overcame that. We would know that because it's your life story. I guess I'm really thinking kind of about politicians. I'm thinking about, a Mitt Romney versus even a Hillary Clinton. Mitt Romney born to a very wealthy family, Hillary Clinton not. She's a woman. She overcame a lot more. But when it comes to other categories, like for me, if I see a black woman walk in the room, I mean, it's not like I look at every black woman and think this because I'm not always thinking about that. I automatically afford her a certain amount of respect because she's a woman, she's a person of color. So there's no doubt that she had to overcome more adversity than most likely the rest of the people in the room in so many different ways. And I wonder if that is doing a disservice to that woman. I wonder if it is a good thing to acknowledge. How do you hear it when I say it? How does it sit with you?
I like it, but I would push you and ask, how does your respect show up? Right. So internally you say, you know what? Hey, there's a black woman or a Latina walking into the room. I'm going to give her the respect that she deserves because I believe that she's overcome something. Now, if you don't know her background, her pedigree, she may have been born with a silver spoon in her mouth, but she still walks through the world as a black woman.
Exactly.
Right. And with every that. So then the question becomes, OK, Pete, you're giving her respect. What does your respect look like? Right? Do you ensure that she feels welcome? Are you an ally versus an advocate? Because the ally is passive. That's the person who inside, like you said, says, hey, there's a black woman. Glad to see her in here. Hope she does a good job. The advocate is active and says, hey, we need to listen to April. I would love, regardless of who she is, if she is in that room, that means that she belongs in that room. So whether she's the CEO or she's an associate or, anybody in between, it's incredibly important for the advocate to be active and say, hey, I want to hear, let's stop the conversation for a second. I want to hear what April has to say, right? That's stepping up and showing her literally, right, actively that you respect her. Because it's one thing to say it in your head. It's another thing to ensure that you are imparting that respect to others.
Well, I think I would categorize myself as an advocate, but with a caveat, if you will. And I'll give you just one anecdote. So I don't know. Are you familiar with Laura Coates, who's a legal analyst at CNN?
Absolutely.
So she is a woman who I created an opportunity for at SiriusXM, and she was a regular guest on my show, and then she started sitting in for me, hosting, and then she got her own show, and then she got CNN, But the problem, and I'm really proud of that, but the problem was that I just kind of, someone referred her to me and said that this is a woman who is a former DOJ lawyer and she wants to get into media. But, and so I advocated for her. But then the struggle became, well, I want to try to advocate for more people that come from marginalized communities. But how do I find them if they don't fall into my lap, if someone doesn't suggest them, if I don't just, see them or hear them, how do I actively go and find them? Because the vast majority of our networks are people like ourselves from our childhood, from college, from our work experience. So for me, it's a lot of white guys. And so I want to help people from marginalized communities, but I want to actively help them, but I don't know how to find them, and I don't want to be patronizing. I don't want to be like, oh, I want to help black people, but I do, or gay people, or transgender people. So, what are some of the pathways or resources or solutions for advocates, people who do want to help, but that you have to find those people and they don't just get referred to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is use the platform that you have. You have this podcast, right? There's no reason why, and Laura, me, there's no reason why you can't say, hey, I want to work with, this particular community and assist in this way. Can you help me find some talented folks? I do that all the time, and I'm happy to do that. I'm followed, I've got an obscene number of followers on Twitter now, and I'm followed by a lot of journalists and editors. And so every now and again, someone will reach out and say, will reach out to me and say, we're looking for marginalized writers to write on this particular topic, or will you write on this particular topic? So, I'll give you an example. A very well-known publication reached out to me, nationally known publication reached out to me and said, when Toni Morrison died, we would love for you to write a piece on what she meant to you. And I said, thank you for the opportunity, but you need to talk to some Black authors. I'm a writer, right? But I don't consider myself an author. I write, articles from time to time for various publications, but I'm not an author. Let me give you the name of 6 authors who would be fantastic to write about what Toni Morrison meant to them. And that worked out well. So was I turning down money? Absolutely. But more importantly, I was giving an opportunity to someone who may not have been on that publication's radar, but should have been. You, Pete, with your platform can do exactly the same thing. Hey, I want to bring folks into media, from traditionally underrepresented communities who are interested. You can set up a fellowship. You can have people, send you messages on Twitter. There are a myriad of ways to do that. Your network is broad enough that you absolutely can, and bring some folks along with you. Who else do you know who's in the same advocacy space, who is interested in helping those who are marginalized, and who have the capital to do so?
Okay, so that's great advice, and I am definitely going to take it and apply it. So what about people who don't necessarily, they call this political correctness, and they say, listen, I just want to hire or work with the best people. I don't care if they're men, if they're women, if they're gay, if they're transgender. I don't care. I just want to work with the best people. If it happens to be a young Black woman, great. If it happens to be a young white man, fine. I just want to work with the best people. I'm guessing that you have an issue with that.
I do, in the sense that I ask what your network is. Right. Because as you said, like attracts like, right? We are most comfortable with our own tribe, whatever that means. And so I agree with meritocracy. Right. And this is something that comes up with my work, in the entertainment industry and Oscar So White all the time. So what are you saying? You want quotas? You want, you want a certain number of Black people or whatever on each film? Not at all. I'm saying let the best person audition for the part or become the director or whatever the case may be. But where are you looking for those folks? You have to expand outside of your network, because who's to say that the best person for that particular role isn't a queer woman of color, right? But you don't know any. So you are, and what we know is that in every single industry, whether it's tech or entertainment or education, diversity sells and it brings the best results. So, yes, you should have the best person for the job, but how do you know you have the best person if you're only looking in that same network? You're only using that same Rolodex that you've been using, right? And so when I talk to agents all the time, I say that, how are you finding the next Viola Davis or the next Clint Eastwood or the next Martin Scorsese if you're only looking in LA and New York? Because I don't believe talent is geographically specific. Right. So when's the last time you all have been to Kentucky? Maybe the next Leonardo DiCaprio is living there in Kentucky, but doesn't know how to find an agent and can't afford to move to LA or New York. And so they're just languishing there when you can have a star in your hands.
How has this, this role that you're playing in bringing certainly diversity to the world of entertainment, how have you seen things change since you first sent this tweet, #Oscars So White, in the entertainment industry? Where has the pushback been?
From the top. because, again, as I said, change is hard. And so when we're talking about studio heads, the vast majority of which are white males, when they believe that they can continue doing what they have always done, then that's where the problem is. I think the beautiful thing is that in the recent past, we've seen more actors and actresses create their own production company. So they're not waiting for a seat at the table. They are, creating their own mansion and putting their own table in it and making the art that they want to see. It's two steps forward, one step back all the time. We see great things like, HBO just finished their series Watchmen, which I absolutely loved, right? Absolutely loved. At the same time, HBO a few years ago was thinking about making a show called Confederate, which was going to be based on, what would happen if there were still Black enslaved people in the South in current time, right? So, it's always a struggle. It's always a challenge. But until we can change who the gatekeepers are, and maybe that's agents, maybe that's studio heads, maybe that's directors and producers, until they represent the people that they want to come to see their work, whether it's film or TV or stage or anything else, then we won't see true progress.
But forget about any of what we're talking about. If the bottom line were just making money for a studio head, you would think that they're understanding the importance of diversity just in making money from, obviously, there's so many different films and television shows that are predominantly Black folks to even like Crazy Rich Asians and other groups. Why isn't it obvious that there is a real market and a lot of demand? Forget about political correctness or politics or ideology. Like just because money, green.
Part of it, right. But and that's the way it should be. But part of it is also the internal bias that these folks have. And I'm not calling it racism or bigotry or discrimination or anything else. I'm saying that we all look at the world through our own lens, what we bring to the table. Right. And so there are people today who still say that Black Panther and Crazy Rich Asians were anomalies. We're exceptions to the rule, and that lightning in the bottle can never be replicated. And so they don't see it as the wave of the future. And that's why we continue to push back on that and say, look at the distinction, look who the demographic is, the rising demographic, the biggest section of folks who go to the movies are Latinx folks. Right. And so why aren't you talking about Latinx rom-coms and having action heroes who are clearly, and actively part of the Latinx community? That makes perfect sense. And you're leaving money on the table when you don't, but they're willing to sacrifice that to continue in the old ways. And I think that's why we see the rise of digital platforms, which sort of democratize the playing field, Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime, and even digital platforms like YouTube, right? So people can make their own work. A fantastic example of that is Matthew Cherry, former NFL player who got into, who got into the film industry. The first thing he did was create an entire film on his iPhone. So we can talk about the importance of that, using the resources that you have. He didn't have the huge dollies and the grips and whatever. It was his iPhone. And he actually submitted that film to South by Southwest to great acclaim. Now, one of Matthew's next projects, he's also working with Monkey Paw Production, which is Jordan Peele's production company. So that has given him opportunities to direct on TV shows like Blackish and so on. But his personal project has been something that he started via GoFundMe. So this was a crowdsourced campaign to create a book called Hair Love, which was about a young Black girl with wild, unruly, beautiful hair that her dad was trying to manage and comb for her. That book did so well that it was created into an animated short, which is now shortlisted for the Academy Awards.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, and so his story alone is fantastic, but the way that he involved the community with respect to Hair Love and the acclaim that it's received both in book form and now in visual form, because it was the opening little snippet, because it's a short film, the opening snippet before Angry Birds 2 this year. And now here he is with a potential Oscar nomination, right? And so that just goes to show what one can do when given the opportunity. You know, he's a Black man, so, you know, with not a ton of film experience, and yet here he is now, you know, perhaps shopping for a tuxedo as we speak.
I feel like one of the biggest problems with the conversation about income inequality and racial inequities is what you just said. If only people could understand, April, what clearly you understand, and certainly I now understand about opportunity or lack of opportunity in terms of, in America, social mobility, moving up the ladder, getting a good education. People so often, I think probably most people, buy into this idea that in America, anything is possible. President Obama used to talk about this. Anything is possible. Look at my journey. And it used to be like, you got lucky, man. You had some good opportunities. Plenty of marginalized people have good opportunities, doors that open for them. But the problem is the vast majority of marginalized communities don't have those opportunities. The data says that if you're born in this zip code, you're most likely to end up in a certain spot at age 18 versus in that zip code. It's always about opportunity. And the best thing that we can do, and clearly this is a lot of your work, is educating people about how to create those opportunities and open those opportunities. But that to me is one of the biggest myths about America and the American dream, that everybody, if you work hard, you can make it here. Bullshit. You have to have an opportunity. You have to have opportunities. Am I off on that?
No, I absolutely agree. You know, you can be the most prepared, you can be the smartest in the classroom, but if you don't have, you know, I'll give you a personal example. Yeah, as I mentioned, I went to 3 high schools in 3 different states. My last high school, I was in Georgia, outside of Augusta, where they have the Nationals golf tournament every year, the Masters, excuse me. I started that high school March of my junior year. Okay, so I had 2 months and then a whole another year, and that's it. When it came time to, and I will tell you that I graduated 18th out of 537 students, right? Wow. So I was a smart kid. I was, you know, on all of the clubs you're supposed to do. My SATs were good, all of that. And so now I'm applying to to colleges, excuse me. And of course, you know, I knew that I wanted to go to a great school. I knew I wanted to go to law school even at that time. So I'm applying to the Ivy Leagues and all the other great colleges. And I was getting, I don't think I've ever said this publicly, but I was getting rejection letters. And I couldn't understand why. You know, my essay was good, yada, yada, yada. And I was getting rejection letter after rejection letter. And finally, my mother went up to the school because she's mama bear, like, you know, so many Black mothers are, including me. And she said, you know, I don't understand what's going on. What we found out later is that the school counselor who was in charge of writing the recommendations for students was, to be kind, an intolerant person. And she, yeah.
Why would you be so nice?
Well, you know, because I've moved on, but I think the story is instructive.
Okay.
But she had written a really bad recommendation for me.
What?
For no reason whatsoever. Again, I'd never ever been in trouble, never skipped school, none of that. Had never even been in the principal's office except to receive a commendation. And yet she didn't like me. And again, I'd only been there for not even a full year and a half. But she didn't like me. And so she stymied my chances to get into even better schools, you know, according to the charts and, you know, and all the rest of that stuff than I actually got into for no reason whatsoever. So, when we're talking about opportunity, it's rough. It's rough for everybody, but especially for marginalized folks, because sometimes, and my mother actually ended up calling one of the Ivy Leagues in which I didn't get in, and she was very persistent and eventually got to an admissions counselor who would talk to her about my submission. And the admissions counselor said to her, I'll never forget this, and this was 1986, 87, said to her, I can't give you the details, but if I were you, I would get a lawyer. It was that bad.
Wow.
It was that bad. And we didn't, and I went to a great school that I'm, happily support, have a tattoo about them and all the rest of that stuff. And I am just fine. But, when we talk about opportunity, we never realize, who is sort of holding those strings and preventing someone who appears to be otherwise qualified from getting that opportunity. And that's why, as advocates, we have to step up at every opportunity. That's why, I am a huge advocate of, banning the box on resumes when we're talking about formerly incarcerated folks. I am very supportive of a double-blind resume search so that your internal bias isn't saying, well, there's a name with too many vowels in it, or I can't pronounce it.
I'll never forget learning this statistic about how does it work, that white sounding names with lower grades have more admission into good schools. I think it might even be Ivies, the best schools, than black sounding names with much better resumes grades. Like there's a real hard data on that just the name on the resume, black sounding, it almost begs the question why, black families wouldn't just name their kids white sounding names just to give them a better opportunity.
Well, because we have a Barack and we have an Oprah and we have a Condoleezza. Right. And because Black parents shouldn't have to buy into losing the heritage that they are proudly instilling in their child for their child to be able to succeed. Right.
Well, that's the point.
I think that's the answer. Right. And so we can't flip it back on I don't like to use the word victim very often, but, those who are in the less advantageous position to change what they're doing when truly what needs to change is the system.
Before I let you go, and I'm just loving this conversation, April, and I really appreciate you educating
We should have done this long ago.
We really should have, but it doesn't matter. Now we can do it a lot more. I mean, I want to have these conversations, just keep going with folks like you. So, but you talk a lot about and educate and advocate a lot about, and this idea of intersectionality. It's a fairly new word and idea. I'm sure a lot of people listening don't know what that word is, but I want to have you kind of define that for me. And then maybe if you want to answer within this question, what's going on, do you think, with the Black community in 2019? Not that they're monolithic, obviously, but there are some real issues still with the gender, sexual orientation, LGBT, Black folks, all of that. That is part of the intersectionality that we're talking about. And it seems like there's still a real issue there. Help me understand the word and then that specific type, that kind of intersectionality.
Sure. For me, and I think that, there's an official definition. For me, it's just recognizing that people have within them multiple identities. So we talked about initially, how do I identify? I identify as a Black woman, and that's two different things, right? And so we need to talk about the distinctions between being a Black person or being a woman, and what it means when you marry those two things together, because I walk through the world differently than I would as a Black man, or I would walk through the world differently as I would as a white woman, right? There are distinctions there. And so what I think as society should do is attempt to honor all of the identities that folks have, whether it's sexual orientation or gender identity or race and ethnicity and nationality, whether it's disability, First Nation status. Those are all the things that I talk about with respect to Oscar So White and inclusion in the entertainment industry. With respect to the LGBT plus community, I don't want to put that all on Black folks. I think that all racial communities have issues with homophobia. Right. And so, I think it's a false flag to say that Black people particularly have that issue, and I know that that's come up with some of the Democratic presidential nominees. Oh, why isn't he or she trending, with people in the South? And it's because he's gay. No, I don't think so. I think it's because he doesn't know anybody down there. He doesn't have any credibility down there. Right. I think that we in the Black community have a long way to go with respect to fully embracing our friends, our guys and gals and non-binary pals in the LGBT plus community. But I think everyone does, right? You think about Matthew Shepard years ago, right? That was a young white male gay kid.
Yep.
So we all have more work to do to be more mindful and thoughtful about people who don't identify the way that we do. I think, with respect to disability for sure. And, just thinking about things, I had an opportunity to work with a very well-known brand several months ago, and they were showing me some of their consumer product offerings, right? And, we're going to have, these little toys and clothes and what have you. And I said, okay, I've been here for a couple of days now. Let's have a conversation about the clothes that you're offering, right? And why there are so many buttons and not snaps. Because what we know are that for folks who have limited hand mobility or dexterity, snaps are a lot easier to work with than buttons. And for you, this huge conglomerate, multi-billion-dollar company, doesn't matter to you whether you use buttons or snaps as long as people are buying that particular shirt. Am I a part of the, disabled community? I'm not. But, again, I think it's important for all of us to show up for those who are more marginalized than us in every way that we can, and they said to me, oh, well, we never thought about that. And I was like, okay, well, great. And now that you have, now what, right? What does the change look like? What are you solving for here? And that transcends every single intersection we can talk about. If you're casting a film, and if the writer's got the script and he says or she says, this is, the protagonist is a feisty, leggy blonde, in her mid-20s. Okay, great. So now by the time that gets to, agent, producer, and director and whatever, and we're now at casting, if they're thinking feisty, leggy blonde, they're thinking Jennifer Lawrence. They're not thinking Zendaya. Right? Or anybody else. But now tell me what her hair color has to do with her being a protagonist in this film. That's what I'm talking about. It starts on the page. It starts at the source. So by the time you get to the Oscars down the road, at the very end, you say, oh, well, there aren't any nominations for this particular group, which is, something that I've said for years. Well, yeah, but part of that is because way back in the beginning, the opportunity, as we've talked about, the opportunity was lost. Right? Because you decided that hair color was more important than having an amazing character. Viola Davis talks very openly about the fact that How to Get Away with Murder, sort of her seminal TV work, that role was not written for a Black woman. And she didn't think she was going to get it. And she was not the first person they called. And they actually had her audition. And so it went really well. And then they realized that she is the one, but then they had to retool the scripts, because she said, I am going to play a full-bodied Black woman. And you, writer's room, need to figure out what that means. And so, in How to Get Away with Murder, the scene that almost everyone remembers is when she was sitting sort of at her vanity and she took her wig off. And I'm not sure that we've ever seen that. It's actually at least been a really long time since we have. But that moment for Black women was transformative, right? It wouldn't have been written for a white woman. But now that it was, how are you going to deal with that? And those are the important choices that I think people need to make from the very beginning with respect to creating opportunities for traditionally underrepresented communities.
You've opened my mind so much on a lot of things that I certainly trend towards thinking, but could never articulate. And I can't thank you enough, giving me, and I think probably a lot of people listening, a lot of gifts and a lot to think about. And I just want to keep this conversation going with with you. April Rain, everybody. Go to her Twitter page, and then you can easily get to her website. You can hire her. You can learn from her like we did today. What a great conversation. What a great human being. And you must be really proud of the work that you've done, especially over the past few years, much more than the work that you did protecting asbestos makers.
Absolutely. Well, I'm definitely living a much better life than I was 25 years ago. I appreciate the conversation and you letting me ramble on. This was great.
Dude,
great.
No rambling at all. I'll tell you if there was rambling. There wasn't any. It was great. I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot, and I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, April.
Absolutely. Anytime.
April Rain, everybody. Definitely give her a follow on Twitter. Consider bringing her in to consult your company. I learned a lot from that conversation. I hope that you did as well. It is Christmas week, everybody, so I hope that you are having a good one. I hope it's not too stressful. Happy Hanukkah as well. I am going to be putting up shows on Wednesday and Friday this week, which I'm really excited about. Got some great guests coming up. The best thing you can do for me for Christmas is tell your friends about the podcast. Tell them to download, tell them to subscribe, tell them to give it a rating, and of course, sign up on Patreon, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. January 18th, I'll be headlining the Charleston Comedy Festival. I'll be at the Smithtown Theater in Long Island on New Year's Eve. And that is all we've got for you today. No extras. Sorry about that. Going to try to have a lot more robust shows, more guests coming up. And we're figuring it out with your support. Can't do it without you. All right. Have a great one. I'll talk to you Wednesday.